The rejection email was so chipper, it felt like a slap. After careful consideration of an exceptionally competitive pool of applicants, it began, full of empty praise for my grades, my essay, my everything. But the result was the same, no scholarship. I stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. It made no sense. I was a perfect fit, valedictorian, captain of the debate team, with enough volunteer hours to qualify for sainthood. My fiancé, Liam, leaned over my shoulder, his hand a warm, steady presence on my back. He read the email and frowned. "That's weird," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Babe, are you sure everything on your application was correct?" And that was it. That one simple question was the loose thread that, when pulled, would unravel my entire life. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. To understand the full scope of the catastrophe, you have to understand my family. For as long as I could remember, I was the designated adult. My parents, let's call them Mona and Rick, were the charming, perpetually adolescent duo who seemed to believe that budgets were suggestions and consequences were for other people. They weren't bad people, not in the way you see on the news, but they were fundamentally unserious. Life was a party, and they were determined to be the last ones on the dance floor, even if the building was on fire. And my sister, Chloe? She was the golden child, the one who inherited their charm without any of the pesky responsibility that I seemed to have been born with. While I was balancing my first checkbook at 14, Chloe was mastering the art of the tearful plea to get the latest phone. While I was working weekends at a greasy diner to save for a car, Chloe was getting a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday because she'd had a really tough week. My role was simple. I was the family's resident problem solver, the emotional and, increasingly, financial backstop. It started small. "Rebecca, honey, can you lend us $100 until Friday? The electric bill is just surprisingly high this month." Friday would come and go, the $100 a distant memory. Then it was bigger things. "We had a little fender bender, and the insurance deductible is just outrageous. You wouldn't happen to have your savings handy, would you?" I was always praised for being so mature, so responsible, so understanding. What I was, in reality, was a doormat, a walking, talking emergency fund, with a misplaced sense of filial duty. Liam, my fiancé, saw it from day one. He'd watch my mum call me, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness, and his jaw would tighten. "You know that's not normal, right?" He'd ask gently after I hung up, having just agreed to pay for a critical plumbing repair at their house. I'd always brush it off. "It's just how they are. It's easier to just do it than to argue." The truth was, I was terrified of the argument. I was terrified of the guilt trips, the accusations of being selfish, the dramatic sighs, and whispered disappointments. Keeping the peace was my full-time, unpaid job, so I paid. I paid for their mistakes, their impulses, their inability to say no to themselves. I was the family's quiet, reliable infrastructure, and I was starting to crack under the strain. The scholarship was supposed to be my escape hatch. A full ride to my dream university, a chance to finally build a life that was entirely my own, without the constant, draining weight of their expectations and emergencies. It was more than just money for tuition, it was my declaration of independence. That's why the rejection felt like more than just a disappointment, it felt like a life sentence. The weirdness Liam had pointed out gnawed at me. I had triple-checked that application. Every ear was dotted, every T was crossed. My social security number, my address, my financial information, it was all perfect. Or it should have been. The scholarship was a prestigious one, a full ride that also came with a significant stipend. It was specifically for students with a high GPA and a demonstrated financial need. I more than qualified on both fronts. My part-time job barely covered my own expenses, and my parents' chaotic finances were a matter of public record, or so I thought. The scholarship committee's email had a generic line about being unable to provide specific feedback, but there was a phone number for the financial aid office. Liam pushed me to call. "What's the worst that can happen?" he said. "They say no again? You're already at no." He was right. My hands were trembling as I dialed, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I was put on hold, subjected to a tinny version of a Vivaldi piece that only amplified my anxiety. Finally, a kind-sounding woman named Brenda picked up. I explained my situation, my voice sounding small and shaky, even to my own ears. I gave her my application number. I could hear her typing on the other end. "Okay, Rebecca, I have your file right here," she said. "Excellent grades, wonderful essay on marine biology, very impressive." "Thank you," I mumbled. "So, could you tell me why I was denied?" There was a pause. More typing. "Well," she began, her voice hesitant, "it looks like the denial was based on the financial eligibility portion. According to the credit report we ran, your debt-to-income ratio is, well, it's very high. There appears to be a significant outstanding loan under your name." I laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. "That's impossible," I said. "I have a credit card with a $500 limit that I pay off every month, and that's it. I've never taken out a loan in my life." Brenda's silence was heavy. "Ma'am," she said, her tone shifting from kind administrator to cautious professional, "according to this report, there is a personal loan for $20,000 that was taken out 6 months ago. The monthly payments are substantial. $20,000. The number echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my apartment. It was a phantom number, an impossible figure that had no place in my life. I felt the blood drain from my face. Liam, who had been watching me with a worried expression, immediately came closer and put his arm around me. "Is everything okay?" he mouthed. I just shook my head, my mind struggling to process the information. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered into the phone. "A clerical error. Maybe you have the wrong Rebecca." "The social security number matches, as does the date of birth," Brenda said, her voice full of professional sympathy. "I can't give you any more details, of course. I'd recommend you pull your own credit report immediately. You're entitled to a free one every year from the major bureaus." The call ended with a polite but firm finality. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The room felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in. A loan. A $20,000 loan. Someone had stolen my name, my future, and used it to buy what? And a terrifying, sickening thought began to bloom in the back of my mind, a suspicion so ugly I could barely give it a name. The process of pulling my credit report felt surreal, like I was investigating a crime committed against a stranger. Liam sat beside me, a silent pillar of support, as I navigated the clunky website of the credit bureau. I typed in my name, my address, my social security number, the very same information that had been so flawlessly entered on my scholarship application. After answering a series of security questions that felt both invasive and absurd, "Which of the following streets have you previously lived on?" the page loaded. And there it was. In black and white, listed under the installment accounts section, was a loan from a company I'd never heard of, Pinnacle Finance. The original amount was exactly $20,000. The date it was opened was 6 months ago, right around my 21st birthday. The payment history showed 6 months of on-time payments, which was almost as confusing as the loan itself. Who would steal my identity only to be responsible about the payments? It didn't make any sense. My mind was a frantic mess, sifting through possibilities. Was it a stranger? A sophisticated phishing scam? But how would they have gotten all my information so perfectly? My social security card was locked in a safe deposit box. I never used public Wi-Fi for sensitive transactions. I was careful. I was responsible. That was my whole identity. And then, my eyes landed on the mailing address listed for the account. It wasn't my apartment, it was my parents' house. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It was a gut punch, a moment of such profound, sickening clarity that I felt like I was going to be sick. It couldn't be. They wouldn't. But I knew they would. I knew. The little things started clicking into place with horrifying speed. The way my mum had insisted on helping me with my scholarship forms, hovering over my shoulder as I filled them out online. The way my dad had casually asked for my social security number a few months back, claiming it was for a family life insurance policy he was setting up. The sudden influx of cash they'd had right around that time. The new patio furniture. The weekend trip to a fancy resort they claimed a friend had gifted them. The way they'd been so cagey about their finances lately, even more so than usual. It was all there, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to an unthinkable betrayal. "Liam," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Look at the address." He leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. I saw the exact moment he understood. His face I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Look at the address." He leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. I saw the exact moment he understood. His face hardened, a cold, protective anger, replacing his usual easygoing expression. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. He just wrapped his arms around me as I started to shake. Not from cold, but from a rage so deep and so hot, it felt like it could incinerate me from the inside out. My parents. My own parents had stolen my identity, saddled me with a crippling debt, and in doing so, had torched my future. The scholarship wasn't just a lost opportunity anymore. It was the first casualty in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. The drive to my parents' house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Liam drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I sat in the passenger seat, silent, a storm of fury and grief raging inside me. Every memory of me being the good daughter was now tainted. Every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd put their needs before my own, felt like a fool's errand. I had been funding my own destruction. I had been propping up the very people who were soaring off the branch I was sitting on. The house looked the same as it always did, a little worn around the edges, but with a forced cheerfulness. The new patio furniture was prominently displayed, a garish monument to their deceit. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. When we walked in, they were in the living room, watching some mindless reality TV show. My mum, Mona, looked up and smiled, a bright fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca, honey, what a nice surprise," she chirped. My dad, Rick, just grunted a hello, his eyes still glued to the screen. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, which was probably for the best. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with the golden child right now. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I held up my phone, the credit report still displayed on the screen. "I think you have something to tell me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. My mum's smile faltered. She glanced at the phone, then at my face, and a flicker of panic crossed her features. "What is that, sweetie? Is everything okay?" It was the opening act of her favorite play, feigned ignorance. "A $20,000 loan, Mum," I said, my voice getting louder. "A loan from a company called Pinnacle Finance. A loan taken out in my name, with my social security number sent to this address. A loan that just cost me a full-ride scholarship." The colour drained from her face. My dad finally looked away from the TV, his expression shifting from bored to cornered. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at my mom, a silent, desperate communication passing between them. "Now, Rebecca," my mom started, her voice taking on that wheedling, placating tone I knew so well. "Don't get hysterical. There's a perfectly simple explanation." "Then I'd love to hear it," I snapped, my control finally breaking. "I'd love to hear the simple explanation for why my own parents would commit identity theft and fraud against me." My dad stood up, puffing out his chest in a weak attempt at authority. "You watch your tone, young lady. We are your parents." "And you're criminals," I shot back, the word hanging in the air, ugly and undeniable. "You stole from me. You lied to me. You ruined my future for what? For a new patio set? For a weekend getaway?" My mum started to cry, big, theatrical tears. "We were desperate, Rebecca. You don't understand. We had some unexpected expenses. We were going to pay it all back before you ever found out." It was the classic excuse, the one they'd used 100 times before. But this was different. This wasn't $100 for the electric bill. This was grand larceny. This was a fundamental betrayal of trust that could never be undone. Liam, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "You do realize this is a felony, right?" he said, looking directly at my father. The look on my dad's face was something I'll never forget. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't shame. It was the pure, unadulterated terror of a man who had finally been caught. The perfectly simple explanation was as pathetic as I expected. It tumbled out of them in a torrent of self-pity and excuses, a masterclass in avoiding accountability. My dad had made a bad investment on a tip from a guy at his bowling alley. He'd lost several $1,000s of their already non-existent savings. Panicked, they saw my pristine credit and my upcoming 21st birthday as a solution. It wasn't even a question for them. It was a resource to be tapped, like a checking account. My name, my future, was just another line of credit. "We were going to pay it back, Becca," my mum sobbed, twisting a tissue in her hands. "We've been making the payments. We didn't want you to worry." "You didn't want me to worry?" I asked, my voice dripping with a sarcasm so bitter it felt like acid on my tongue. "You didn't want me to worry, so you secretly took out a loan in my name that could financially cripple me for the next decade. A loan that just cost me an education I've been working for my entire life? That was your plan to prevent me from worrying?" They had no answer for that. They just stared at me, their faces a mixture of fear and wounded indignation, as if I were the one being unreasonable. The most galling part was their complete lack of understanding of the severity of their actions. They talked about it like they'd borrowed my car without asking, not like they'd committed a serious financial crime. "It's just a signature, Rebecca," my dad muttered, trying to downplay it. "It's not like we hurt anyone." "You hurt me!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "You hurt my chances of getting a house one day, of getting a car, of being financially independent. You hurt my trust in you, in my own family. How could you not see that?" Chloe chose that moment to make her grand entrance. She drifted down the stairs, phone in hand, looking annoyed at the commotion. "What is all the yelling about?" she asked, her tone bored. "Mom, Dad." My mom immediately turned to her, her face crumpling in a fresh wave of tears. "Rebecca is being so cruel to us," she wailed, rushing to her golden child for comfort. "She's accusing us of terrible things." Chloe shot me a venomous look. "You're always so dramatic, Rebecca. Why are you always trying to upset them?" It was a perfect, textbook example of our family dynamic. I was the villain for exposing the crime, not them for committing it. I was the problem for having a reaction to their abuse. I looked at the three of them, weeping, manipulative mother, my cowardly, blustering father, my entitled, clueless sister, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, a hard, cold stone in my chest, but the rage was crystallizing into something else. It was becoming resolve. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in any way that mattered. I was a victim. And I was done being quiet. I was done keeping the peace. "I want a written confession," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want you to detail exactly what you did, when you did it, and why. And then I want you to give me every single piece of documentation related to this loan." My dad scoffed. "And why would we do that?" "Because," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "if I don't have that confession on my kitchen table in 24 hours, my next stop is the police department. And I'll have Liam as my witness." The threat hung in the air, heavy and final. The look of shock on their faces was almost satisfying. They had never imagined their quiet, responsible Rebecca would ever fight back. They had made a very big mistake. The 24 hours that followed were a tense, silent war. I went back to my apartment with Liam and we just sat there, the unsaid things filling the space between us. He was furious on my behalf, a quiet, simmering anger that was more comforting than any words could have been. He made me tea, wrapped me in a blanket, and just let me be. My phone buzzed intermittently with texts from my mother. They were a masterwork of emotional manipulation. First came the guilt. "I can't believe you would threaten your own family. We are devastated by your cruelty." Then came the gaslighting. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It was just a simple loan, a misunderstanding." Then, the attempts to rug sweep. "Can't we all just move past this? Family is more important than money." I didn't respond to a single one. Every message just solidified my resolve. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They weren't worried about my future. They were worried about their own. The next afternoon, exactly 23 hours after my ultimatum, there was a knock on my door. It was my dad, looking haggard and defeated. He didn't look at me. He just thrust a manila envelope into my hands and mumbled, "Here." Then he turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door, my heart pounding. Liam came to stand beside me as I opened the envelope. Inside were the original loan documents from Pinnacle Finance. My signature was forged on the bottom of every page, a sloppy, amateurish attempt to mimic my handwriting. And underneath the loan papers was a single sheet of notebook paper, torn from a spiral. It was the confession. In my mother's flowery, dramatic script, it detailed the whole sordid affair. The bad investment, the panic, the decision to use my information because I was so responsible, and they knew I would understand eventually. It was a self-serving, pathetic document, full of justifications and excuses. But it was a confession nonetheless. It was proof. Holding it in my hands, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I just felt empty. This piece of paper was a tombstone for the family I thought I had. It was the official record of their betrayal. Liam read it over my shoulder. "This is good," he said softly. "This is what you need." He was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. The first step was to contact Pinnacle Finance. I took a deep breath and dialed their number, the confession and loan documents spread out on the table in front of me like battle plans. I was transferred to their fraud department, to a man named Mr. Henderson, whose voice was tired and cynical, as if he'd heard it all before. I explained the situation, my voice clear and steady. I told him I was the victim of identity theft, perpetrated by my own parents. I told him I had a written confession and the original loan documents. I expected a fight. I expected suspicion and bureaucracy. What I got was a weary sigh. "Okay, Ms. Evans," he said. "Email me a copy of the confession, your police report, and a signed affidavit. We'll open an investigation." "A police report?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his tone unwavering. "We can't proceed with a fraud claim of this nature without an official police report. It's a legal matter now." I hung up the phone, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. I had the confession. I had the proof. But it wasn't enough. To save myself, I would have to do the unthinkable. I would have to walk into a police station and report my own parents. The decision to file a police report was agonizing. It felt like crossing a line, a point of no return. Part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 2 decades to be the peacemaker, screamed in protest. This would tear the family apart for good. This would be a public declaration of war. But then I looked at the loan documents again. $20,000. A debt that would follow me for years, tanking my credit, preventing me from getting a mortgage with Liam, from starting our life together. It was a ball and chain they had shackled to my ankle, and the only key was in the hands of the law. Liam was my rock. He didn't push me, but he laid out the facts with calm, unassailable logic. "Rebecca," he said, taking my hands in his, "they committed a crime, a serious crime. What they did wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated act of theft. If a stranger had done this to you, you wouldn't hesitate to call the police. The fact that they're your parents doesn't make it better. It makes it 1,000 times worse." He was right. The familial bond, which should have been my greatest protection, had been used as a weapon against me. They had exploited my love and trust in the most profound way possible. My loyalty was to my future now, to the life I wanted to build with him. The next morning, we walked into the local police precinct. The place smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was intimidating and bleak. I felt like a criminal myself, turning in my own flesh and blood. We sat down with a detective, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told her the whole story, from the scholarship rejection to the confession. My voice barely wavered. I was numb, detached, as if I were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. I handed her copies of the credit report, the loan documents, and the handwritten confession. She read through everything carefully, her expression unreadable. She looked at the forged signature, then at my driver's license. She nodded slowly. "This is a pretty clear-cut case of identity theft and fraud," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The confession makes it an easy day for the DA's office." She explained the process. They would open an investigation, interview my parents, and then the district attorney would decide whether to press charges. Given the evidence, she said it was almost certain they would. "You need to understand," she warned, her eyes meeting mine. Once this process starts, you can't stop it. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought of the rejection email. I thought of the condescending look on my sister's face. I thought of my father's cowardice and my mother's manipulative tears. I thought of the $20,000 hanging over my head. I looked at Liam, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I'm sure. As we walked out of the police station and back into the sunlight, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a profound, aching sadness. The family I had known my whole life was gone. I had just signed their death certificate. The fallout was swift and brutal. 2 days later, the detective called to inform me that she had visited my parents' house. They had, predictably, denied everything at first. But when presented with a copy of their own handwritten confession, they had crumbled. Charges were being filed. The news that charges were being filed landed like a bomb in my extended family. My phone, which had been silent for 2 days, suddenly exploded. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in months were all calling, leaving frantic, angry voicemails. The narrative had been swiftly spun by my parents. I was the villain, the cold-hearted, ungrateful daughter who was sending her loving parents to jail over a simple misunderstanding about some money. My mother, a master of propaganda, had painted a picture of them as victims, 2 well-meaning parents who had made a small mistake out of desperation and were now being persecuted by their cruel, unforgiving child. The family, who had never once offered to help me or check in on my well-being, were now united in their condemnation of me. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was the worst. "How could you do this to them, Rebecca?" she shrieked down the phone line. "After everything they've done for you, they gave you a roof over your head, they fed you, and this is how you repay them, by trying to put them in prison." I tried to explain, to tell her about the loan, the scholarship, the years of financial and emotional exploitation. She wasn't interested. "Family is family," she kept repeating, as if it were a magic incantation that absolved all sins. You don't turn your back on family. It was infuriating. Their definition of family was a one-way street. It meant I had to give endlessly, forgive unconditionally, and absorb all their dysfunction without complaint. But the moment I stood up for myself, the moment I drew a boundary, I was the one who was breaking the sacred code. Chloe, of course, was leading the charge. She posted a long, rambling diatribe on social media about the importance of forgiveness and the tragedy of a family being torn apart by materialism. She didn't mention the $20,000 loan. Of course. She just vaguely referred to financial disagreements and painted me as a money-grubbing monster. Friends of hers, people I had known for years, were liking and commenting in support. "Your sister is being so selfish. I can't believe she'd do this to your poor parents." It was a public shaming, a digital witch hunt. I felt isolated, like the whole world had turned against me. The only person in my corner was Liam. He became my fierce protector, my press secretary, my wall against the tide of vitriol. He screened my calls, deleted the abusive comments, and reminded me constantly that I had done the right thing. "They're just mad because you're upsetting the system," he told me one night as I cried in his arms. "You were the designated shock absorber and you've quit. Now they're all feeling the bumps for the first time and they don't like it." He was right. I had been the family's emotional and financial caretaker for so long that they had forgotten how to function without me. My rebellion wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat to their way of life. The legal process ground on. I had to give a formal statement to the district attorney. I had to sign an affidavit for Pinnacle Finance, officially declaring the loan as fraudulent. With the police report and the confession, they quickly absolved me of the debt and removed it from my credit report. That was a small victory, a tiny pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. But the family drama was a gaping, festering wound. I blocked their numbers. I deactivated my social media accounts. I created a small, quiet bubble for myself and Liam, a safe space where the noise of their anger couldn't reach me. I was an orphan, in a way. My family was still alive, but they were dead to me. And in a strange, painful way, it was a relief. The court date was set for a dreary Tuesday in October. I wasn't required to be there, but I felt a morbid compulsion to go. I needed to see this through to the end, to witness the final act of the drama my parents had written. Liam took the day off work to come with me. He held my hand as we walked into the courthouse, his presence a silent reassurance. The courtroom was small and stuffy, smelling of old paper and anxiety. My parents were already there, sitting with a public defender who looked bored and overworked. They looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken and pathetic. My mother was dressed in a drab grey suit, her face pale and tear-streaked. My father just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Chloe was sitting behind them, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I avoided their gaze and sat on the opposite side of the room with Liam. The proceedings were quick. The charges were formally read: grand larceny, identity theft, and multiple counts of fraud. The DA presented the evidence, the loan documents, my forged signature, the credit report, and the pièce de résistance, their own handwritten confession. Their public defender didn't have much to work with. He mumbled something about them being in a desperate financial situation and having no prior offences. He argued for leniency, for probation, for anything other than jail time. My mother started sobbing loudly when he mentioned the possibility of prison, a calculated performance for the judge. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, was unmoved. She looked over the documents, her expression grim. She looked at my parents, then she looked at me. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of something that looked like sympathy. "This court sees cases of financial desperation every day," the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "People lose their jobs, they get sick, they fall on hard times. But what you did," she said, her gaze locking onto my parents, "was not a simple act of desperation. It was a profound and calculated betrayal of trust. You didn't just steal money, you stole your own daughter's identity, her security, and her future. You used her good name, a name she has clearly worked hard to build, to bail you out of a mess of your own making. And you did it without a second thought for the consequences to her." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "There must be consequences for that." My mother's sobs grew louder. My father seemed to shrink even further into his cheap suit. The judge sentenced them to 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service each, and mandatory financial counseling. They were also ordered to pay me back the full $20,000 in restitution, though I knew I'd likely never see a dime of it. And finally, she issued a restraining order. They were not to contact me, directly or indirectly, for a period of 10 years. 10 years. It was a decade of court-mandated peace. As the bailiff led them away to be processed, my mother looked at me one last time, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. "I hope you're happy, Rebecca," she mouthed silently. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel anything. I just felt free. The weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for my entire life was finally gone. I was no longer the family's designated adult, their emergency fund, their peacemaker. I was just Rebecca, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Life after the court case was quiet. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No more frantic phone calls demanding money. No more passive-aggressive texts guilting me into some family obligation. No more drama. It was unnerving at first, like the phantom limb of an amputee. I'd find myself bracing for a call that never came, tensing up whenever my phone buzzed. The anger and the grief were still there, but they were fading, replaced by a vast, empty space. I had to learn who I was without the constant backdrop of my family's chaos. Liam was my guide in this new, uncharted territory. He helped me rediscover the simple joys of a normal life. We cooked dinner together, went for long walks, planned our wedding. We talked about our future, a future that was now ours, and ours alone, unencumbered by my family's debts and demands. It was a slow, painstaking process of rebuilding. My credit score, now scrubbed clean of the fraudulent loan, began to recover. I reapplied for scholarships, this time with a new essay. I wrote about resilience, about the cost of betrayal, and about the strength it takes to choose yourself. I didn't get the full ride to my dream school that ship had sailed, but I got a generous financial aid package from another excellent university, one closer to home. It wasn't the future I had originally planned, but it was a good future, a future I had earned. I started therapy, something I should have done years ago. My therapist helped me unpack the decades of conditioning, the ingrained belief that my worth was tied to my usefulness to others. She helped me see that what my parents did wasn't just about money, it was about control. They had used love as a leash, and I had finally, painfully, slipped the collar. We got a dog, a goofy golden retriever we named Brody. He filled the apartment with a chaotic, joyful energy that chased away the last of the shadows. He gave me a reason to get up in the morning, a living creature to care for who gave nothing but unconditional love in return. It was a revelation. Sometimes I would think about my parents. I wondered if they were doing their community service, if they were going to their counseling sessions, if they felt any remorse at all. I doubted it. People like them rarely change. They just find new victims. I heard through the grapevine a cousin who had dared to break the family embargo and send me a tentative, supportive text that Chloe was now footing their bills. The golden child was finally learning what it was like to be the beast of burden. I couldn't even muster the energy to feel smug about it. I just felt a quiet pity for her. She was in the cage I had just escaped. One day, about a year after the sentencing, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. The restraining order prohibited direct contact, but she had sent it to Liam's parents, who had forwarded it to me, unsure of what to do. It was a long, rambling letter, full of self-pity and blame. She wrote about how hard their lives were, how much they had suffered, how I had abandoned them in their time of need. Tucked inside the letter was a check for $50, the first installment of the court-ordered restitution. It was a pathetic, performative gesture. I looked at the check, at my mother's familiar, looping handwriting. Then I looked at Liam, at our happy, peaceful home, at our goofy dog chewing on a toy. I took the letter and the check, and I walked to the shredder. I fed them both into the machine and watched as they were sliced into unrecognizable strips. It was over. It was finally, truly over. The shredding of the letter was a turning point. It wasn't an act of anger, but one of finality. It was me, closing the book. The $50 check was an insult, a clear message that they still didn't grasp the magnitude of what they had done. It was their way of saying, "See, we're trying. You're the one holding the grudge." But it wasn't a grudge, it was a boundary, it was a scar. You don't invite the person who stabbed you over for dinner just because they sent you a Band-Aid. The peace that followed was profound. My life, for the first time, was wonderfully, blissfully boring. My days were filled with classes, studying, wedding planning, and walks with Brody. Liam and I fell into a comfortable, happy routine. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my lifelong companion was gone. I hadn't realized how much energy it took to constantly manage my family's emotions, to anticipate their needs, to be their emotional regulator. Without that burden, I felt lighter, more focused. I was excelling in my classes. I was making new friends, people who knew nothing of my past, who saw me simply as Rebecca, not Rebecca, the responsible one. It was liberating. The wedding planning was a source of unexpected joy. We decided on a small ceremony, just our closest friends. My side of the aisle would be sparsely populated, but it would be filled with people who genuinely loved and supported me, not people who were there out of obligation. Liam's family was incredible. They had been horrified by what my parents had done, and they embraced me as their own without hesitation. His mother, a warm, kind woman named Sarah, stepped in to help with the wedding details. She never once overstepped, never made me feel like I was a charity case. She was just a mom, the kind of mom I had always deserved. One afternoon, Sarah and I were looking at wedding dresses. I found one I loved, a simple, elegant A-line dress that made me feel beautiful. As I stood in front of the mirror, I saw tears well up in her eyes. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look so beautiful. Your mother should be here to see this." A year ago, that comment would have sent me into a spiral of grief and anger. But now, something had shifted. I just smiled, a small, genuine smile. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "The people who matter are here." In that moment, I realized I had stopped mourning the family I had lost and started celebrating the family I had chosen. My family wasn't defined by blood anymore. It was defined by love, respect, and unwavering support. It was Liam, it was Sarah, and the rest of his wonderful family. It was my small circle of loyal friends. That was my family, and it was more than enough. The restraining order was a shield, a legal document that gave me the space I needed to heal. But the real boundary was the one I had built within myself. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I deserved to be treated with respect. I deserved to have my future protected. I deserved to be happy. My parents hadn't just stolen $20,000 from me. They had stolen my peace of mind, my sense of security, my belief in familial love. But I was taking it all back, piece by piece. They could keep their $50. I was building a life that was priceless. The wedding was perfect. It was a sunny day in early June, held in the backyard of Liam's parents' house. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of colour and life. We had about 30 guests, a small collection of the people who had stood by us through the entire ordeal. There was no drama, no tension, no one to placate or manage, just love. As I walked down the makeshift aisle on the arm of Liam's father, I saw Liam waiting for me under a flower-covered arch. He was beaming, his eyes shining with a love so pure and unconditional it took my breath away. In that moment, the last vestiges of my old life felt like a distant dream, a story about someone else. We wrote our own vows. Liam's were beautiful, full of promises to always be my safe harbour, my champion, and my partner in all things. When it was my turn, I looked out at the small crowd of smiling faces, and then back at the man I was about to marry. I used to believe that love was about sacrifice, I began, my voice steady. I thought it meant putting everyone else's needs before my own, keeping the peace at any cost, and being strong for others, even when I was breaking. I thought my worth was measured by how much I could carry for other people. Then I met you, and you showed me that real love isn't about sacrifice, it's about support. It's not about carrying someone's burdens, but about walking beside them so they're strong enough to carry their own. You didn't save me, Liam. You gave me the strength to save myself. And I promise to spend the rest of my life building a home with you where we both feel safe, respected, and unconditionally loved. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. After the ceremony, as we were taking pictures, one of my cousins, the one who had reached out, pulled me aside. "I just want you to know," she said, her eyes full of a sad sincerity, "that I'm so proud of you, and so is my mom. We know what they're like. We've all been dealing with their drama for years. You were just the only one brave enough to stop it. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. It was a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the dysfunction I had experienced was real. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply exposed its rotten core. The reception was a joyful, relaxed affair. We ate good food, drank champagne, and danced under the stars. At one point, Liam and I slipped away from the party to have a quiet moment to ourselves. We stood by the edge of the woods, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of laughter from the party. "Happy Mrs. Henderson," he whispered, using his last name, which was now my last name. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," I said. The name change felt significant. I was no longer Rebecca Evans, the daughter of Mona and Rick, the family fixer. I was Rebecca Henderson, Liam's wife, a co-creator of a new life, a new family. It was a clean break, a new beginning. That night, as we fell asleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. The ghosts of my past had finally been laid to rest. The road to get here had been paved with pain and betrayal, but I had made it through. I was free. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the best was yet to come. The first year of our marriage was a beautiful continuation of the peace I had fought so hard to win. We settled into our new life as a married couple with an ease that felt both exhilarating and deeply comforting. We were a team, in the truest sense of the word. We navigated the small challenges of a leaky faucet, a ridiculously high electric bill with laughter and collaboration, a stark contrast to the unilateral, crisis-driven decision-making of my past. I was still in school, working towards my degree in marine biology. The subject matter fascinated me, the quiet, complex world of the ocean, a welcome escape. There was a logic to it, a system of cause and effect that was refreshingly straightforward. If you change the pH of the water, the coral reefs bleach. It was a simple, undeniable truth, unlike the murky, gaslit reality of my former family. Liam's career in software engineering was taking off. He was brilliant and passionate about his work, and seeing him so fulfilled brought me a deep sense of joy. We were building a life together, brick by brick, a foundation of mutual respect and shared dreams. We were two whole people choosing to be together, not two broken halves trying to fix each other. The restitution checks from my parents stopped after the third month. I wasn't surprised. The $50 payments had been a performance, a way for them to tell themselves they were fulfilling their obligation. Once the initial sting of the court order wore off, so did their motivation. I called the probation office to report it, not because I needed the money, but because it was a matter of principle. They had to be held accountable. The probation officer sighed, a sound of weary resignation. He informed me that they would be issued a warning. If they continued to violate the terms of their probation, there would be further consequences. I didn't hold my breath. My concern wasn't about them anymore. It was about protecting my own peace. The restraining order was my shield, and I was grateful for it every single day. About 8 months after the wedding, I received a message on a professional networking site from a woman who had been a childhood friend. We had drifted apart in high school, mostly because I was always too busy working or putting out fires at home to have much of a social life. Her message was hesitant. "Hey Rebecca, this is a little random, but I heard about what happened with your parents. My mum is friends with your Aunt Carol. I just wanted to say, I get it. And I'm on your side." She went on to explain that her own family had a similar dynamic, with a manipulative parent and a golden child sibling. She had spent years feeling like she was the crazy one, until she finally cut ties. "It's the hardest and best thing you'll ever do," she wrote. Her message was a gift. It was another voice from the outside, validating my experience. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that these toxic family systems were tragically common. We met for coffee the following week. We talked for hours, sharing stories that were eerily similar. We laughed about the absurdity of it all, the ridiculous excuses, the blatant gaslighting. It was like finding a fellow veteran of a secret war. We both left that coffee shop feeling a little less alone, a little more understood. It was another small, crucial step in my healing process, finding a community, however small, of people who had survived the same kind of battle and come out the other side, stronger and wiser. As my graduation from university approached, a new kind of anxiety began to surface. It wasn't the old, familiar dread of family drama, but the standard garden variety fear of the unknown. What would I do next? Where would I work? For so long, my future had been a blurry concept, something I hoped to survive long enough to reach. Now, it was here, a vast, open landscape of possibilities. My degree was in marine biology, a field I was passionate about, but that wasn't exactly known for its lucrative, readily available jobs. Liam was incredibly supportive. "We'll figure it out," he'd say, his optimism a constant, calming presence. "You followed your passion. We'll make it work." We spent hours looking at job postings, from research positions at aquariums to conservation work with non-profits. Many of the most exciting opportunities were in other states, on the coasts. The thought of moving was both thrilling and terrifying. It would be another definitive step away from my past, a physical distance to match the emotional one. One evening, I found a posting for a junior research position at a prestigious oceanographic institute in California. It was a dream job working on coral reef conservation, a topic I had written my thesis on. It felt impossibly perfect, a long shot. The application required transcripts, letters of recommendation, and a personal essay. As I sat down to write the essay, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. I wrote about my initial, thwarted attempt to get a scholarship, without going into the sordid details. I framed it as a story of resilience. I wrote about how that initial setback had forced me to re-evaluate my path and had ultimately deepened my resolve. I wrote about how the fragility of a coral reef ecosystem mirrored the fragility of trust, and how both required constant, dedicated effort to protect and restore. I poured my heart into that application, my hopes and my history woven into every sentence. I sent it off with a click, feeling a familiar mix of hope and trepidation. A few weeks later, I got an email. They wanted to schedule a video interview. I was ecstatic. I spent the next week preparing, researching the Institute's recent publications, practicing my answers to potential questions. Liam acted as the mock interviewer, asking me tough questions and giving me feedback. The interview itself was a blur. I talked to 3 scientists, all of whom were brilliant and intimidatingly smart. I talked about my research, my passion for conservation, my hopes for the future of our oceans. I tried to convey my enthusiasm and my dedication without sounding naive. I logged off from the call, feeling completely drained, with no idea how it had gone. The waiting was excruciating. Every email notification made my heart leap. A week went by, then 2. I started to lose hope, convincing myself I had blown it. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an email with the subject line, "Offer of Employment," appeared in my inbox. I opened it, my hands shaking. They were offering me the position, a full-time salaried position as a marine biologist. In California. I screamed. Liam came running into the room, a look of alarm on his face. I just pointed at the screen, unable to speak. He read the email, and a huge grin spread across his face. He picked me up and spun me around, both of us laughing with a mixture of joy and disbelief. It was happening. We were moving to California. We were starting a new chapter, 1,000 miles away from the ghosts of my past. It was more than a job. It was a validation. It was proof that I had made the right choices, that I had fought the right battles. I had saved myself, and now, my future was finally, truly beginning. The move to California was a whirlwind of cardboard boxes, packing tape, and emotional goodbyes. Saying farewell to Liam's family was the hardest part. They had become my family, my anchor in the storm. Sarah cried as she hugged me, making me promise to call every week. Liam's dad shook his hand firmly, man to man, telling him how proud he was. There was so much love and support in that goodbye, a world away from the bitter, silent departure from my own family. We packed our lives into a moving truck and drove across the country, with Brody the dog snoring happily in the back seat. The journey itself felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of the distance I was putting between my past and my future. With every mile we drove west, I felt the last lingering threads of obligation and guilt snapping. We found a small apartment a few miles from the coast, with a balcony that got a sliver of an ocean view if you craned your neck just right. It was perfect. The Oceanographic Institute was even better than I had imagined. It was a vibrant, bustling place, filled with passionate, brilliant people who were all dedicated to the same cause. My work was challenging and fulfilling. I spent my days in a lab, analyzing water samples and coral data, and occasionally got to go out on research vessels. I was a small cog in a large machine, but it was a machine that was doing important work, and I was proud to be a part of it. Liam found a job at a tech startup in the area almost immediately. We were a 2-income household, a team. For the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. We were building a life on our own terms, a life of stability and peace. We made new friends, other young couples who, like us, had moved to California for work and adventure. Our weekends were spent hiking in the nearby mountains, exploring the coastline, and having barbecues on our tiny balcony. It was a simple, happy existence. One day, about 6 months after we moved, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my cousin, the supportive one. Her voice was strained. "Rebecca," she said, "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but Chloe called me. She's a mess." My stomach tightened. I hadn't spoken to or heard from any of them in years. "What's wrong?" I asked, a sense of weary obligation I hated creeping back in. "It's your dad," she said. "He's sick, really sick. The doctors are saying it's cancer." The news hit me with a strange, hollow thud. I felt a flicker of something, a distant echo of sadness for the father he should have been. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard wall of self-preservation. "And Chloe is calling you, why?" I asked. "She's overwhelmed," my cousin explained. "Your mom is falling apart and Chloe is stuck paying for everything. The medical bills are piling up. She wanted to know if you would help." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything they had done, after the theft, the lies, the public shaming, the complete lack of remorse, they were coming to me for money, again. The cycle was trying to start all over again. But this time, I was different. I was stronger. "No," I said, my voice calm and firm. "The answer is no." My cousin was silent for a moment. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll tell her." After I hung up, I stood looking out at my sliver of the Pacific Ocean. I felt a pang of sadness for the man who was my biological father, for the life he had wasted. But I felt no guilt. I had given them my childhood, my trust, my money, my future. I had nothing left to give. My responsibility was here, in this new life I had built. My responsibility was to my husband, to my own well-being, and to the peace I had fought so hard to find. I would not set myself on fire to keep them warm. Not anymore. The request for money, as audacious as it was, served a useful purpose. It was a test, a final exam for the new, stronger Rebecca I had become, and I had passed. Saying no wasn't hard. It wasn't agonizing. It was simple. It was the natural, logical response of someone who had learned to protect herself. The old me would have been consumed by guilt. I would have spent sleepless nights weighing my duty against my own needs. I would have probably sent them money, sacrificing my own hard-won security for their sake. But that person was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that no is a complete sentence. A few weeks later, a letter arrived, forwarded from Liam's parents. It was from Chloe. The handwriting was a spiky, angry scrawl, so different from my mother's performative loops. The letter was a masterpiece of vitriol and entitlement. She called me a heartless monster, a selfish coward who had abandoned her family in their darkest hour. She wrote about her suffering, about how she was working 2 jobs to pay for Dad's medical treatments while I was living it up in California. She accused me of hoarding my money and my happiness, as if it were a finite resource I had stolen from them. "He's your father too," she wrote. "Don't you feel anything?" I read the letter, and what I felt was not guilt, but a profound sense of pity for her. She was trapped. She was living the life that had been destined for me, the life of the caretaker, the beast of burden. She was propping up 2 people who had proven themselves to be emotional and financial black holes. She was learning, the hard way, that their love was entirely conditional, based on what she could provide for them. Tucked into the letter was a photograph. It was of my father, lying in a hospital bed. He looked frail and old, a shadow of the blustering, arrogant man I remembered. It was a clear, calculated attempt to manipulate me, to trigger a wave of guilt that would open my wallet. I looked at the photo, at the face of a man who had stolen my future without a second thought, and I felt nothing. A cold, clinical detachment. He was a stranger to me now, a character in a story from a long time ago. I showed the letter and the photo to Liam. He read it, his jaw tightening with anger. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "They have no shame." He looked at me, his eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "It's sad, but it's not my sadness anymore." We didn't talk about it again. The letter went into the shredder, just like my mother's had. It was just more noise from a world I no longer inhabited. My world was here, with Liam, with Brody, with the steady, rhythmic crash of the ocean waves. My world was filled with challenging work, good friends, and a future that was bright and full of promise. My father's illness, my sister's anger, my mother's desperation, they were storms raging in a distant country. I could see the dark clouds on the horizon, but I was safe and dry in my own home. I had chosen my family, and I had chosen my peace, and I would not let them take it from me again. A year passed. A year of quiet, steady progress. I was promoted at the institute, given more responsibility and my own small research project. Liam's startup was acquired by a larger company, a move that brought him a significant pay increase and a new level of professional recognition. We were thriving. We started talking seriously about buying a house, a real house with a yard for Brody and a garden for me. We spent our weekends driving up and down the coast, looking at quaint little towns and dreaming about where we would put down our permanent roots. It was a future I could never have imagined for myself just a few years earlier. The spectre of my biological family had all but vanished. There were no more letters, no more calls. The silence was complete. I assumed Chloe had finally accepted that the Bank of Rebecca was permanently closed. Then, one day, I got an email from my Aunt Carol, My mother's sister, the one who had screamed at me for betraying the family. The subject line was just one word: funeral. My heart did a strange little flip in my chest. I opened the email. It was short and to the point. My father had passed away. The funeral was to be held the following Saturday in our old hometown. Your mother thinks you should be there, the email concluded, a final, parting shot of guilt tripping. I stared at the words, a wave of complex, conflicting emotions washing over me. There was no grief, not in the traditional sense. How can you grieve for someone who was already gone from your life? But there was a sadness, a sense of a chapter definitively ending. The man who had given me life, and who had also tried to ruin it, was gone. The question of whether to attend the funeral loomed large. Liam was clear. You don't owe them anything, Rebecca, he said gently. You don't have to go. You don't have to put yourself in that toxic environment. He was right, of course. I didn't owe them my presence. I didn't owe them a performance of grief, but a small, curious part of me wanted to go. I wanted to see them one last time, from the safety of my new life. I wanted to observe them, like a scientist observing a foreign species. I wanted to confirm that I had made the right choice, that the distance I had created was not just justified, but necessary. I think I want to go, I told Liam, surprising even myself. But I don't want to go alone. I'm with you, he said immediately, without a moment's hesitation. Whatever you need. We booked flights for that Friday. The decision felt heavy, like I was willingly walking back into the lion's den. But I wasn't the same person who had fled that den years ago. I was stronger now, shielded by a life of my own making, and by the unwavering love of my husband. I wasn't going back as a daughter. I was going back as an anthropologist, a survivor visiting the ruins of a civilization she had escaped. I needed to see it one last time, to close the book on my own terms. Flying back to my hometown felt like traveling back in time. The air was thicker, the sky a duller shade of grey. As we drove from the airport, the familiar, drab landscape felt suffocating. We checked into a hotel, a neutral space that felt safe and anonymous. I had no intention of staying under a family member's roof. The morning of the funeral was cold and overcast, a perfect match for the occasion. I dressed in a simple, conservative black dress. I wasn't there to make a statement, I was there to observe. Liam, in a dark suit, looked like my handsome, steadfast bodyguard. Walking into the funeral home was surreal. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the sound of hushed, somber whispers. And then I saw them. My mother, draped in black, looking every bit the grieving widow. She was holding court, surrounded by a circle of sympathetic relatives, soaking in the attention. Chloe was standing beside her, her face a mask of stony resentment. She looked tired and worn down, years older than her actual age. Her eyes met mine across the room, and the look she gave me was pure venom. The extended family members who saw me either stared with open hostility or quickly looked away, as if my presence were a contagion. The shunning was palpable. It was a silent, collective judgment. I felt a flicker of the old shame, the old feeling of being the outcast, the problem child. But then Liam squeezed my hand, a small, grounding gesture that brought me back to the present. I was not that person anymore. Their judgment meant nothing to me. We took a seat in the back row, content to remain invisible. The service was a masterclass in revisionist history. The pastor, who barely knew my father, eulogized him as a loving husband, a devoted father, and a pillar of the community. Friends and family members went up to share sanitized, heartwarming anecdotes that bore no resemblance to the man I knew. They spoke of his generosity, his humor, his unwavering support for his family. It was like listening to a eulogy for a complete stranger. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play. This was the story they had all agreed to tell, the comfortable fiction that allowed them to ignore the ugly truth. My mother and Chloe both spoke. My mother's eulogy was a dramatic, tear-filled performance about losing her soulmate. Chloe's was short and bitter. She spoke about her father's long, painful battle with his illness, and she shot a pointed, angry glare in my direction as she talked about the family members who weren't there for him in the end. The accusation was clear, but it didn't land. I felt no guilt, only a sad recognition of her pain. She was the last victim of his legacy, left to clean up his mess. After the service, as people were milling around, my Aunt Carol made a beeline for me. "I see you decided to show your face," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "It's a little late, don't you think?" Before I could respond, Liam stepped forward slightly, a subtle but firm movement. "We're here to pay our respects," he said, his voice polite but icy. "That's all." My aunt looked from him to me, then seemed to think better of starting a scene. She just sniffed, "Some people have no shame," and walked away. We didn't stay long. I walked past the open casket, a final, morbid curiosity. He looked small and peaceful, a stranger in a suit. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no love, just a profound, empty nothing. As we walked out of the funeral home and into the cold, grey afternoon, I took a deep breath. It was done. The final tie had been severed. The book was closed. I had seen the ruins, and I knew, with more certainty than ever, that I had been right to escape. The flight back to California was a quiet one. I spent most of it looking out the window, watching the patchwork of the country slide by below. The funeral had been a necessary ordeal, a final, unpleasant task that needed to be completed. It had provided a strange, grim closure. It confirmed that the family I had left behind was not a family I could ever have been a part of. Their world was built on a foundation of secrets, lies, and carefully constructed narratives. My presence, my very existence as a person who knew the truth, was a threat to that foundation. As we drove home from the airport, the California sun felt warmer, the sky a more brilliant blue. Our small apartment felt like a sanctuary. I walked out onto the balcony and breathed in the salty air. The sliver of ocean view was a sliver of paradise. I was home. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking not about my father's death, but about my sister's life. I felt a strange, detached sorrow for Chloe. She had won the title of Golden Child, but what had it cost her? She was now chained to my mother, financially and emotionally responsible for a woman who would drain her dry without a second thought. She had traded her freedom for her parents' conditional approval. She had chosen the cage, and I wondered if she would ever realize she held the key. I would never reach out to her. The bridge between us had been burned too thoroughly, but I hoped, for her sake, that she would one day find the strength to walk away, just as I had. I hoped she would realize that she deserved a life of her own, not one lived in the long, dark shadow of our parents' dysfunction. My life continued on its peaceful, happy trajectory. We bought a house, a charming little bungalow in a quiet coastal town with a big yard for Brody. I planted a garden, filling it with vegetables and flowers. The simple act of putting roots into the earth felt profoundly meaningful. I was building something real, something that would grow and flourish under my care. My work at the Institute continued to be a source of passion and purpose. I was part of a team that made a real, tangible difference in the world. I was contributing to something larger than myself, something that had nothing to do with family obligation or emotional blackmail. Liam and I were happy, deeply, contentedly happy. Our love was the bedrock of my new life, a constant source of strength and support. We were partners, equals, best friends. We were building a future together, a future based on trust, respect, and a shared vision of a peaceful, joyful life. The pain of my past had not disappeared entirely. It was a part of my story, a collection of scars that would always be there, but they no longer hurt. They were just a reminder of how far I have come, of the battles I had won. They were a testament to my own resilience. Years have passed. Our life in California is everything we dreamed it would be. Our little bungalow is a home, filled with laughter, the click-clack of Brody's paws on the hardwood floors, and the smell of whatever new recipe I'm trying out. My garden is thriving. I've become that person who leaves boxes of surplus zucchini on her neighbor's doorsteps. My work is still my passion. I lead my own research team now, and we've had some small but significant breakthroughs in coral reef restoration. It's a slow, patient, and often frustrating process, but it's good work. It's work that matters. Liam is now a senior executive at his company. He's a natural leader, calm and decisive, and he's respected by everyone he works with. But he's never let his success change him. He's still the same kind, supportive man who held me as my world fell apart, the man who gave me the strength to save myself. We have 2 children now, a boy and a girl. They are bright, funny, and full of life. They are growing up in a home filled with love, stability, and unwavering support. They will never know the kind of fear and obligation that defined my childhood. They will never have to be the designated adult. They will just get to be kids. Their grandparents are Liam's parents, who dote on them endlessly. They are the only grandparents my children will ever know, and I am profoundly grateful for that. My mother and sister are ghosts from another life. I have not spoken to them since the funeral. The restraining order expired years ago, but the boundary I built within myself is permanent. I hear whispers about them occasionally, through that one cousin who still maintains a tentative contact. My mother lives with Chloe. Their relationship is, by all accounts, fraught and codependent. Chloe is single, still working multiple jobs, her life consumed by the needs of a woman who will never be satisfied. It's a sad story, but it's not my story anymore. Sometimes, when I'm tucking my own children into bed, I think about the choice I made all those years ago. The choice to walk into that police station, to file that report, to blow up my family in order to save myself. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was an act of brutal, painful self-preservation, but I know with every fiber of my being that it was the right thing to do. I chose my future, I chose my peace, I chose my own family. I look at my life now, my loving husband, my wonderful children, my fulfilling career, my peaceful home, and I know that none of it would have been possible if I had not made that choice. I had to burn down my old life to build a new one from the ashes. So, I'll ask you, the person listening to my story, did I go too far, or did I not go far enough? Let me know what you think.